Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Cal's Corner here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host. And the executive producer of this show is the one and only Rob McConnell. Now, folks, as you know, on Cal's Corner here, we cover everything from politics to the paranormal, which is a wide variety of subjects. So for today's show, it's going to be a bit all over the map, unscripted as usual. And what I'd like to do is just start this first segment by kind of recapping and recapsulating the importance of some of the stuff that top UFO researcher Dr. Bruce Maccabee had said. Bruce, of course, had agreed to come on the show. He was on last week and the week before. And the timing of his appearance was not coincidental. I don't believe in coincidences for what it's worth. I believe in cause and effect. And in this case, with the anniversary of the Kenneth Arnold sighting coming up, which happened in June of 1947 and is a big deal for people interested in the subject of UFOs, as well as maybe general history, it was time to have Bruce on there, especially since he's written this wonderful new book, which is an analysis of the Kenneth Arnold sighting. And in the words of Bruce Maccabee, presents a compelling case that what Kenneth Arnold saw remains unexplained all of these decades later. While it's impossible to prove, and I think even Bruce would admit this as a scientist who's credible, that you can't prove that what he saw were, flying saucers from another planet. The point is his sighting remains unexplained. And if it remains unexplained, unless you can't do anything more with it, it's important to acknowledge that and not try to dismiss it as something else. I will go on record as saying that one of the most ridiculous explanations that I ever saw for the Kenneth Arnold sighting was some bozo. I don't remember who it was. Somebody had said it was pelicans. He mistook a flock of pelicans for UFOs and, reported flying discs or flying saucers. No, Arnold was a good enough pilot to recognize a pelican from, a plane or some metallic object. And pelicans don't look like metallic objects, even though, light can bounce off the wings of feathers and so on. It just doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense at all. And pelicans, to me, are probably the worst attempted explanation for it. It's a desperate one, and it isn't even... I don't even know an analogy that's so ridiculous to cover it. So anyway, in addition to the Kenneth Arnold sighting, Bruce had talked about a case, especially in the last episode, part 2, the so-called Tic Tac UFO case. Now, I want to tell you that this is a very interesting event because it remains unexplained as well. It is not proof. You can't say with 100% certainty that whatever was filmed and seen and tracked on radar was a craft from another planet. Again, by the standards of science, and God bless science for having these standards, you can't quite prove it. On the other hand, the case needs to be solved, and it's a mystery that people are pursuing. Bruce Maccabee, much to his credit, has released today his latest analysis, where he does some speed calculations to estimate how fast this craft was apparently flying. And it's a type of science. We need more of this science and scientific approach in the UFO field. I've always told people that sometimes I refer to ufology as the imaginary field of ufology. I want to explain what I mean by that real quickly so that you don't think I'm inconsistent on my view, because I try not to be inconsistent. Ufology is not a real field of science because it's not recognized by science, and it should not be. Now, I'm saying this not because I have exposed UFO hoaxes. I'm not a so-called skeptic or debunker. And that's another can of worms. Because thanks to people like Stanton Friedman, who have their own unique UFO dictionaries, you would like to believe, or he likes to make you believe, that debunkers are people who have closed minds and that their minds are made up. You can't reason with them. Friedman is famous for saying, "Don't confuse me with facts. My mind's already made up." And he uses that quote to describe many skeptics. Well, here's what I have to say in response to that. Please grab any major dictionary that you might own. Go for the Oxford English Dictionary, American Oxford English, Webster's, whatever. Type in the word or look up the word debunker, and you will see that it's actually doesn't mean what Friedman says. Debunk means to remove the bunk from something, okay? Because bunk is BS, as we say. Bunk is nonsense. It's not true. So if I debunk it, I'm taking the bunk out of something, okay? If I decaffeinate something, I'm taking the caffeine out of something. Hello, it's English. So if I debunk something, I'm taking the bunk out of something. Well, you would like to think that people like Stanton Friedman or other UFO researchers would welcome when the bunk is removed from a UFO case. So if debunkers are so bad and they remove bunk from a UFO case, why are they bad? It makes no sense. And this is what bothers me about the imaginary field of ufology, is it has no standards. Anybody can claim to be a ufologist, and they would be telling the truth. Now, in my own UFO dictionary, which I admit is my own definition, I define ufology as the scientific study of UFO reports. We don't say UFOs because we can't study them. They won't cooperate in that process. We need to capture one, or they need to come forth and we can study them. But since that has not happened, okay, that we know of or can prove, we have to study reports, what people claim they saw. So let's say that you go investigate a UFO sighting. You meet John Smith. He says, yep, I saw this metallic disc, probably at least 10 meters in diameter, hovering right above those trees there. And my neighbor saw it. And you interview his neighbor, Bob. He says he saw it too. And there's no evidence these guys are lying. There's no evidence they're misinterpreted something. So what can you do with that report after you find no evidence of a hoax? It seems 100% credible. What can you do with that report once you're done investigating it and you just can't find any evidence to indicate that these people didn't see what they claim they did? What do you do with that report? You file it away. Maybe you write a book. Maybe you work the talk show circuit, do TVs, lectures. I don't know. Whatever you want to do. The point is you can't do anything more with it. It doesn't prove anything. You still can't say, not only did Bob see an alien craft, that craft was from Zeta Reticuli. You can't say that. So this is why ufology is not really a science. There's no qualifications to be a ufologist. Anybody can claim they're one, and they are. A dog could even be a ufologist by that standard, okay? Some dogs would probably do a better job investigating UFO reports than some UFO researchers I know. So there is no standards to be a UFO researcher, no requirements. The UFO field doesn't even agree on its terminology. And when you have a so-called field that's trying to become a legitimate whatever and grow up to become respectable, and it can't even agree on a standard vocabulary among itself, let alone in compliance or alignment with the real world, such as the misuse of the word debunker, there's no hope for such a thing. It's not a field, it's a hobby, okay? It's a hobby. But if I say I'm Kal Korff, UFO hobbyist, that doesn't sound so good. But if I say I'm a UFO investigator or I'm a ufologist, GIST, that sounds like it's a credible scientific title that means something, when it doesn't mean anything, okay? It doesn't mean anything. It is useless, worthless puffery, but it tends to fool a lot of people, and it sounds good and it reads great unless you really know what it is. So whenever you have a so-called field where debunking, removing the bunk from something is bad, it means you have a closed mind. It is so upside down and backwards, it is ridiculous. But that is what ufology has become when you have certain individuals or researchers or groups or whatever just doing all the wrong things. I don't know how else to describe it without getting unpleasant, I guess. It's just inexcusable. It's like saying, a house is a goat. No, a goat is a goat and a house is a house. They're never going to be the same thing. So that's the problem I have with so-called ufology and ufologists. I have asked many ufologists online. You can search for these exchanges on my Facebook page. Tell me what a debunker is. And what do they almost always tell me, almost without exception? They just blindly repeat what Friedman says. They didn't even think the term through themselves. And I don't know about you guys. I've always loved vocabulary. I've always had a high vocabulary. Did very well in school as a youth, top A student in English. And every time I learn a new word, I think about it for a moment and I like to say, oh, now I understand why that word means what it was. And then when I started learning other foreign languages, I had actually taken 8 of them in high school and took 4 years of German, decided to major in German as far as a foreign language goes. It was interesting to see the Latin roots of these words and the history of them and how they evolved into what they did and where this word came from, French or German or whatever. I just find that stuff fascinating, learning the why of the why of the why. And yet that light seems not to have gone off in many UFO researchers. And I'll tell you this from my own firsthand observation. When I have talked to them and said, think of the word debunk, D then bunk, they're like, yeah, that makes sense. If I whatever, like decaffeinate, they understand that concept. D means to take away or remove from. So if I'm removing bunk from a UFO case, why does that suddenly make me Satan? It doesn't. But again, in the minds of some UFO researchers, when top doesn't mean top, up does not mean up, down does not mean down, it means whatever you want it to be. Well, then you kind of, it's no wonder then why nobody takes ufology seriously and dismiss it as just a hobby. And that's exactly what it is. Now, this is not to denigrate some very good scientific work that's being done by people like Dr. Bruce Maccabee, but Maccabee's not one of these people sitting there, harping on myths like some other UFO researchers are. Okay, so when we come back after the commercial break here, we will talk a little bit more about the Tic Tac case, why it is important, and then we'll give you an update on what's been going on around the world and get caught up there. Since the last 2 weeks of the show, we've been focused on UFOs. We'll be right back after this commercial break.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV. Plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
We live in rapidly shifting times of extreme volatility and uncertainty. Such profound change brings a unique opportunity for the evolution of consciousness. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, host of Mission Evolution Radio Show, a program that explores the latest scientific developments and deepening spiritual truths supporting human evolution. Join me on xzbn.net, where I interview leading experts in science, physics, medicine, spirituality, and more. By applying divergent viewpoints to leading-edge topics, we uncover expansive and evolutionary truth to assist you on your path to enlightenment. More information and past episodes are available at missionevolution.org.
Welcome back to segment 2 here on Cal's Corner Radio. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. Now, we talked about the Tic Tac case, UFOs, debunkers, etc. Let's try to focus this a little bit, and then we'll switch to other subjects. Again, we talked about the Tic Tac case, and the reason that case is important is because here you have some pilots who have come out in public and have gone on record, as well as former Department of Defense officials, who have admitted that there was a secret, maybe top secret, UFO investigation project that was launched as part of a brainstorm by former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, who's a Democrat. He's considered to be a Pelosi Democrat, if that matters. And Reid, of course, is no longer in office. He resigned after a long career in politics. And it turns out that he and two other representatives were able to go get what is called black money. All right, this is money that's off the books, no officially easily located public reference to it. They were able to get millions of dollars, at least 22 million, and go ahead and fund a top secret project to look at certain UFO cases and to come back with a analysis basically saying whether they posed a national security threat to the U.S. government. Now, that's interesting because for decades, the U.S. government has denied that they've been investigating UFOs, and yet here they're doing that. So obviously they weren't telling the truth. And of course, Reid did not hold a press conference saying, hey, guess what we're doing, guys? I'm going to give $22 million of taxpayer money, black money, to people to study UFOs. Never happened. So the official version is that the U.S. government closed its Project Blue Book decades ago after investigating UFOs for nearly 3 decades, and they concluded that there was not a single report that jeopardized the security of the United States. And they also concluded that there was no basic evidence that there was aliens visiting. Okay, they didn't come out and use those words, but that's essentially their conclusion. Now, I want you to take a moment here, and we're going to use the rest of the segment. I want you to try to think this through with me. And if you think I'm wrong on this, please contact me, and I'll be happy to change my opinion if you can convince me that I'm wrong. I don't have an ego in this. Now, imagine you're the U.S. government. You started investigating UFOs through Project Sign and Grudge and Blue Book for decades. Very famous cases that made the news over the years. Very interesting, compelling cases that are just labeled as unknown as far as the investigative conclusion in the Project Blue Book files. And then you can imagine what the Pentagon was doing. They were, of course, concerned over the issue of the Russians. There was a Cold War going on. So their main concern was the immediate neighborhood, Earth, which was, are the Russians doing this? If not, who could be? Well, if it wasn't the Russians, it was probably nobody. All right. And then, well, what about aliens? Okay. Well, that's a whole nother dimension, if you will, a whole nother factor of complexity. Let's say that the government concluded, yep, aliens have visited us. Well, what are they going to do at that point? What can they do? Nothing. I mean, think this through, folks. If you have the technology to travel trillions of miles through space, regardless of the method you use to get there, portholes, warp drive, whatever, if the fact you can get to Earth, buzz our aircraft, fly at 9 or 10,000 miles an hour, stop on a dime, pose for photos, and then leave. The fact that you can do that means that you can do whatever you want pretty much with the whole planet, I would think. I don't know. Maybe a nuclear bomb could stop them, but there's a problem with that. A nuclear bomb would not only stop a spaceship that was coming from another world, in theory, it would also destroy the whole city. So what are you going to do? Wipe out all of New York to get an alien? Well, maybe you'd have to do that. I don't know. So the point is, the government was investigating this stuff. And then, of course, they had a PR relations aspect to it with Project Blue Book to make the public feel more safe and secure, not panic, not have a repeat of the War of the Worlds hysteria. Then, of course, they had their public relations thing with Blue Book. And as Friedman put it, and he's right to a point, Project Blue Book was largely a public relations stunt. However, I have news for Friedman and others. I knew, like Friedman did, Dr. J. Allen Hynek. In fact, we became quite close. And I'm going to share with you a couple of things that happened between Hynek and I, which a lot of people either don't know or they've forgotten. And I'm going to remind them of what our relationship was like. First of all, I got into the UFO field when I was very, very young. I was 11 years old. And how I got into the UFO field, to make a long story short, is when I was in sixth grade and going to a school in Hayward, California, in the Bay Area, we were required to bring in one or two newspaper articles every day to class. And the teacher would go around the room and ask us to summarize each article in our own words. We weren't allowed to read it, look at it, unless we were quoting something or citing a statistic. And the reason our teacher did this is she wanted us to, pay attention to the news, find out what's going on, have some thoughts about it. So there were a couple of classes where they did this. This happened also in seventh grade when I had a wonderful history teacher named George Malone. And so what happened is in sixth grade, Mrs. Bryant, she was my teacher. What happened is one day I told her, I said, my parents don't get a newspaper. They won't pay for one. They're not interested. Now, newspapers were 10 cents back then, but my dad loved watching news on the TV. He didn't like reading the paper that much. And so what happened is I told her, I said, I can't get a newspaper clipping because we don't take a newspaper. And I felt really bad. So she kind of laughed. She says, just ask your friends to give you one or get some from them. I said, no problem. So one day in October, now I'm dating myself, in 1973, all of a sudden in class in October, I'll never forget the day, everybody, without exception, all the students were talking about UFOs. I'm like, where the hell did this come from? What is a UFO? Well, this was October 19th, 1973, and I'll never forget the date. It's an anniversary in my mind still today. I still have the original newspaper clipping, which my friend gave me, and it was about a famous case at that time where a police officer had photographed a so-called alien. Now, this was a so-called Jeffrey Greenhaw case. He received a report to go investigate a UFO sighting. He went out in the countryside to do that, in Arkansas, I believe it was. And what happened is he said he saw this creature standing on the road. He got out of the car. Creature got within 10 feet of him. According to the police officer, he says he took 4 photographs. And the last 2 photographs, the creature is roughly, I think, about 10 feet away. I'm not quite sure I remember the exact dimensions. And you look at this photo, and it's a man, maybe, or an alien, whatever, we don't know, in what looks like a spacesuit. And that case has never been, it's suspected of being a hoax, but as far as I know, there's no confession from the police officer saying, yep, I borrowed a foil-type firefighting suit from the Redstone Arsenal nearby. A buddy of mine got it. He posed on the road. I took his photos, faked it that way. As far as I know, that data has not materialized, although the case is suspected to be a hoax, and that's how the hoax was done. So here I am, 11 years old, curious about everything I don't know, which is still the case today. Why? I want to know the why of the why of the why of the why, that kind of person. And here's this photo of this alien, and it says police officer takes this photo. And obviously, it's either real or it's not. It's binary. And I love binary things because often if you know what it's not, sometimes you can figure out what it is. Whatever's left must be the answer, right? So I'm like, wow, this is great. This is a wonderful thing because we can investigate this. Now, I compare this article to other articles. There was a famous Oakland Raider game at the Oakland Coliseum in 1973, and you can go back through the newspaper archives of the Bay Area press, and you can see that 55,000 people roughly saw a UFO fly over that game. I think it was a Monday night game. And that was a newspaper clipping that I kept a copy of. That was another one presented during that time in class. And the difference is you can't investigate that sighting because a guy sitting in the stadium at night as a glowing object flies over, you really can't get any more data out of that. Maybe you can see if there was a radar tracking or maybe if someone else saw it outside the stadium. But that's very different when somebody says they have a photo of an alien and it's by a police officer and so on. You can investigate that much better. So what I thought was, to myself, and this is why I got interested in the subject of UFOs. I looked at these Greenhoff photos and I said, this is either real or it's not. But the important thing is we can probably find out. And if it is real, the consequences or the implications of us being visited by another race, you can't calculate them. We need to know that if it's really happening. On the other hand, if it's a hoax, what does that tell us about ourselves? Or does it tell us only about an individual? Either way, we learn something. And that's what I was happy at. And that's exactly how I approached it. And I remember these thoughts at age 11, and I've written about them for years. I think I've been fairly consistent along those lines in my approach to UFOs since then. So what I did is I immediately kept all the copies of the articles, became really interested in the subject, because I understood that no matter what the answer ends up being, we can only learn from it. If we are not being visited and millions of people around the world are seeing so-called spacecraft from another world, well, I think that maybe one can argue that we've got a mass psychological problem, and we need to know that if we do, because we've got nuclear weapons and other nice, deadly things. On the other hand, if we are being visited, because there's no question life must exist elsewhere, otherwise we would not be existing according to the rules of science, then we need to know that too. So that got me interested in the subject of UFOs. I went down to the library, checked out all the books, read everything, and then as a young boy was just upset to find out that adults lie. Almost every single book I read in the library was full of nonsense, including George Adamski's Aliens on the Moon, whatever the name of the book was at the time, I don't remember. The idea that, he had contacted people from Venus, was on the backside of the moon. I knew enough about astronomy to know that was nonsense. We'll be back after this commercial break.
From our broadcast studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, to the world and beyond, you're watching the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
AVS Media Den.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on SimulTV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is SimulTV. SimulTV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. SimulTV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have SimulTV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com.
Welcome back to the third segment here on Cal's Corner radio show. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show, once again, is Mr. Rob McConnell. So, as I mentioned, I was a young boy, got really interested in the subject of UFOs. I explained how I got interested in them. I think my reasoning for like, hey, this is either real or it's not, we could investigate this. And the great thing is we can find out. That was my approach back then at the young age of 11, and that still is my approach today. And that's why I tend to be a binary type myself. And when I ask people a lot of questions, I'm famous or infamous, for lack of a better term, for after I hear them trying to answer something, I'll say yes or no. I'm not trying to cut them off, but I'm trying to say, is it yes or no? And if it is yes or no, then we can take it from there. And what I always try to tell people when have taught and given lectures on how to communicate more clearly is two things. One is you do try to have a conversation where the answers are yes or no. And then secondly, you repeat back what you think you're saying. So if somebody says, I saw an object that was 7 meters in diameter, perfect round disc, looked like solid metal, then I would say to that person, okay, you said you saw blah, blah, blah. Repeat it back to them. It's a technique called parroting, named after the bird, of course, the parrot. And then they either correct you if you repeat it wrong, or they will just agree that, yeah, you got it right. In fact, when I've investigated UFO cases, especially when I'm thinking that the guy is not telling me the truth, what I've made a point to do is repeat details back to the so-called witness, missing deliberately a few details to see if they'd catch it. And if they don't catch it, like let's say a guy tells me, yeah, the object was 7 meters in diameter. And I come back to him and I say, well, you said it was 10 meters in diameter. And he says, yeah. Well, then I've got something that's probably not good. But I do those little things as part of being an investigator. And you need to do that. And these skills often helped later in years of becoming later an investigative journalist, which happened a few years later when I started getting published in magazines when I was in high school. So getting back to the Tic Tac case, we have an issue where you have Navy pilots, you have military personnel, you've got radar trackings, we even have video footage of what supposedly is the object that the pilot recalled seeing. Now, you may say, wow, that's great. And why would the government release this info if they're covering up UFOs? It makes no sense. It doesn't make any sense, folks. So is that what's really going on? Absolutely not. Something else much deeper has been going on, much more complex, and nobody to date really seems to know what it is. And that's inexcusable because this case first broke publicly back in December concerning UFO incidents that happened years earlier. Now, the reason this needs to be investigated is because, like the Greenhaw case, like the Betty and Barney Hill case, where Betty Hill draws a star map that supposedly shows her where the aliens came from that visited her, supposedly being, if you believe Friedman, from the constellation of Reticulum. He's basing his conclusion on the works of Marjorie Fish, which, by the way, have been shown not to be they don't hold up anymore. More modern astronomical data has shown that the Hill star map has essentially imploded itself. Friedman won't talk about that, but that's his issue. So what's happened is what makes the Hill case interesting is that the star map can be tested. It was tested. It looked credible at first in the late 60s, early 70s. It has since fallen apart. So now you know that the Hill case is reduced effectively to just another he said, she said abduction case. The star map, which was the smoking gun in the case, is no longer a smoking gun. So the reason the Tic Tac case is important is because it can be solved one way or another. Because that object in the video is either from another planet or it's not. Think about it. It is binary. Those types of cases are golden. And why the UFO field doesn't focus on them more, you'd have to ask the individual UFO researchers. And keep in mind that there's not a single requirement for anybody to be a so-called ufologist. Anybody can call themselves one, and they're telling the truth. But if I call myself a ufologist, that doesn't mean I know what I'm talking about, because again, there's no requirements. So this is why the TikTok case is very fascinating, because it can be solved one way or another. And let's say that the details of the case are accurate, that these objects descended tens of thousands of feet in less than a second, and that they were hovering above the water, supposedly displacing it below them, etc. All this fantastic stuff. Either, again, it's from this planet or it's not. Now, I have heard, and Bruce even said this, that we don't have anything like this. Well, I'm not quite sure we can say that, okay? Because we don't know everything that we have. We don't know what we don't know. And that's a very bad attempt to paraphrase former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, but you don't know what you don't know. So it's a fact that the U.S. government has entities within itself where these people who run those departments stay there for decades, they're career types, where the politicians come and go. And we know that the CIA has made aircraft in the past that they didn't tell the Air Force about until later when they wanted to. The SR-71 is a good example. When that thing was first flown, according to the official records, it was silver in color. So guess what happened when they made a point to buzz pilots and, mess with people? They reported UFOs. And what the CIA did is they used UFOs as a cover story for some of their operations. And what that means is the U.S. government has messed with the minds of the public using disinformation, flying a top secret spy plane saying, we don't know what it was. And to this day, in the Blue Book files, you see some of these reports listed as unknown because they didn't know what they were at the time. The CIA knew. They just didn't bother telling the Air Force until that plane was actually flying for a while and they painted it black. Now, I know all this because I come back to Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Hynek, for a long time, was, for most of the investigation of UFOs that was done, at least publicly, by the U.S. government, Hynek was their scientific advisor. He was an astronomer. He was a American who was of Czech nationality. And when I moved to the Czech Republic in the year 2000, and people started to know who I was, and I was in the paper as a journalist all the time, and even doing the earlier show with Rob McConnell here, Czechs didn't know a lot about UFOs, but they knew the name Hynek, which I thought was interesting. And I asked him, how come you don't know about this, but you know Dr. J. Allen Hynek? And she said, it was a woman who told me this. She said, it's because he was a Czech that became famous in the West. And we love that. Now, keep in mind that the former Czechoslovakia, for decades, thanks to the West, was occupied by the Soviet Union. It was under communism. Its people were repressed. They had been liberated from Hitler, only to be given over to dictator Joseph Stalin. You can understand why Czechs are still bitter about that today. People were killed needlessly. And because the West didn't care about the fate of Central and Eastern Europe, we let Russia have it, take it over, even though we could have forced them to go back to their own borders and kept those people free and democratic, but we didn't bother. We just went back to being isolationists up to a point where we were forced to confront the Soviet Union because ideologically the struggle for world power, if you will, was between what the United States stood for versus communism, which was happening in the Cold War. So when I was in Sonora at a UFO conference that Marv Taylor had put together, it was a very wonderful conference. Marv Taylor was a wonderful human being. He was the northern section director for MUFON at the time, investigator. I was up there, and we spent days with Hynek, and I had met Hynek earlier when I was given a ticket to interview him as a young student journalist by TV producer John Doza. I went to Chabot College, interviewed Hynek on video for TV, and the first thing I remember about him is every time a woman walked in the room, Hynek would take off his hat as a sign of respect. And I thought that was rather interesting because here I was, a young kid, in my teens. The movie Close Encounters of a Third Kind had come out. He was on tour for that, had started the Center for UFO Studies with money from Steven Spielberg he'd earned from that movie. He briefly appeared in the film for a whopping, I think, 6 or 8 seconds. And we had many conversations. He even contributed material and even formally endorsed my Meyer expose book. And his name is in that book. And I asked Hynek, I said, what is the biggest frustration you had, if any, with your time as head of the scientific advisor of Project Blue Book? And he told me that what bothered him is that he was hired to do this job. He says, I tried to do my best, but he said I would run into walls. I would go knocking on doors, talking to people in different departments, asking them, did you launch anything that could cause this? They'd tell me no, even though deep down I knew better. I knew they were lying to me. And I didn't see anything on their face that told me they were lying, but you could tell through process of elimination or just some sort of feeling, as he put it, that they weren't telling the truth. And that really bothered him because he felt like he was betrayed. He felt that at least if they had told him the truth, he was willing to keep a secret, okay? He could keep secrets. But he was, as he put it, a apolitical or non-political person. And at the end of the day, he told the company line. And he said he loved and hated himself for that. So he admitted that there were some UFO cases that were probably top secret government aircraft or experiments going on, and that those were listed as unknowns today, but that wasn't evidence of aliens coming from space. He wasn't a big fan of the Hill case, Hynek told me, and it was interesting to see his frustrations vented, because he told me that the reason he joined Blue Book in the investigation originally was he thought that if there is something there, he'd be on the cusp of it. And he said, like any scientist, if I can discover something new, get a Nobel and all that, that's what I want to do. And he said UFOs presented that potential, depending on what the verdict would be after they were investigated. We'll be back after this commercial break.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
The new nonfiction book, Razor of Madness, is similar to cult movies like Clockwork Orange, Dragon's Tattoo, or The Other Side of Hell. Wayne Morin Jr. and Thomas Lee Howell will expose widespread and systematic deficiencies in this thought-provoking tell-all novel. Mind control rages among scholars in law schools. Human rights are ignored while thought reform and mental manipulation are accepted practices used as behavior modification. Dr. Louis Jolyon West comes to mind. Media and public scrutiny shows that United States mental hospitals are in fact destructive murder industries. Razor of Madness expose novel details this epidemic through an in-depth professional and personal investigation. For decades, there has been a revolving door policy that still releases killers and pedophiles back into society. The maestro of mind control continues to haunt America to this very day. Razor of Madness is available in paperback or as a downloadable ebook at Amazon.com.
The concept of a new age has been around since the late 19th century, yet much of its original meaning has been lost. What exactly is the new age? Is it a religion, a collection of obscure esoteric practices, a series of doomsday predictions, or an astrological event. The New Age Chronicles is a unique complementary publication bringing reason and grounded information to separate fact from fiction. Chock full of valuable information to support you as we make the monumental shift into the new era. You won't want to miss a single innovative issue. The New Age Chronicles newspaper is coming soon to www.newagechronicles.com.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment here on Cal's Corner radio show. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host once again, and the executive producer of the show, as I have said from day one, is the one and only Rob McConnell. Now, getting back to what we were talking about, Hynek was frustrated. He felt he was not told the truth. He vented some of that frustration later in his writings, his very good UFO books, the Hynek UFO Report, and of course, UFOs: A Scientific Inquiry. They were both very good books. Hynek was a very humble man, and I'm going to share something a little on the personal side with you. He was with a husband and wife friend of mine named Alan Barber Reed. Alan Barber Reed helped me put together the first Meyer expose book. The Meyer people certainly know who the Reeds are, and people like Jim Delatoso know who they are, because we all met, and that's when Delatoso tried to convert or convince the Reeds and I that the Meyer case was true, and they'd made that trip, and we recorded Delatoso for a few hours. I transcribed that interview and published it in my Meyer expose books. Anyway, we were all together in the hotel in Sonora, and it was in the evening, and what happened was Hynek also said he didn't understand why Stanton Friedman constantly attacked him. And I told Hynek, it's interesting you mention that, because when I first met Friedman, he did the same thing. Now, I first met Friedman in May of 1975 at Thornton Junior High School. My dad, because he knew I was interested in UFOs, although he wasn't, got me 2 tickets to see Stanton Friedman. He was lecturing at that junior high, and I went to Walters Junior High, and Thornton was a rival junior high school in our school district. And I took my tape recorder with me to record Stanton Friedman, and I did that because my history teacher, George Malone, was always taking a stance against everything I said. And I didn't know, God bless him, that he did that deliberately. He told me after I graduated that he did that deliberately because he wanted me to really push my arguments, think them through. And so when I found out that my teacher didn't believe in UFOs and I did, I had to try to find evidence to convince him that he was wrong, of course. And I was naive, and I believed in a lot of what was written in the books. I believed the Hill case was true. But back then, the astronomy data was not known at that time. That later disproved Marjorie Fish's work. So I thought, maybe this might be credible. So what I did is I interviewed Friedman, and part of the interview, he was criticizing Dr. Hynek, and specifically Friedman had said that Hynek had done a special on TV called UFOs Are Real, or question mark, and he interviewed a little boy who had taken a photograph of an alleged UFO. And as Friedman put it, investigating UFOs does not involve patting somebody on the head, a little boy, and saying, "You wouldn't lie, would you?" That's practically a quote of what Friedman said. And I could tell, even from my young age of 7, that Friedman seemed to be a bit envious of Hynek. Hynek had much more credibility in the minds of people. He was certainly more widely known. Friedman was an up-and-coming guy who started in the late 60s, early 70s. Hynek had been around for decades in the UFO scene. So I admired both men, copied a lot of what Friedman used to do, later found out that I was wrong to do so. And I can absolutely cite chapter and verse on that if anybody wants to go there. And the main thing I'm grateful for, though, is that starting down this track, it allowed me to grow and mature and make adjustments over time so that I could, make sure that I was always after the truth. And I later lectured with Stanton Friedman in high school. I invited him to lecture with me, and we held a fundraiser and charged a couple bucks admission. People showed up, about 350 people. The press covered it. He lectured, I lectured. And I gave my share of the money to our class because it was a fundraiser. He kept his share for himself, which is his right to do so. I'm not criticizing him for it, but I consider Friedman to be a friend. I don't always agree with him. Hynek was absolutely a friend and a mentor. And I just wanted to share some of this insider stuff with you that I grew up with as a kid and throughout my life. Now, back to the TikTok case as we are going to close the show out for tonight. Again, this is a case that has all the elements which UFO researchers should embrace. It has enough data that we can run this down conclusively one way or another. The problem with UFO sightings is that even if you find no evidence of a hoax, you can't really prove the incident ever happened. Instead, you have to believe a story, and it is only a story and nothing more than words and a claim unless any other evidence can be found to independently verify or confirm that claim. So let's say that a guy is telling the truth. He saw something. He doesn't know what it was. You can't even prove that what he described is exactly what he really saw, because you have no control to go back and measure that with. So when he says it was 7 meters in diameter, you don't really know that it was. If it's in there, in the air, and there's no point of reference, you can't really tell how big or far away it is because there's no point of reference. The key is the word reference. So sightings have their limits. And within sightings, they're even more limited because most of the sightings do not involve, never have involved, reports of daylight discs, as they call them. No, most of the reports are of lights in the night sky. Who knows? And the reason they're visible is because it's nighttime. You've got some contrast. Then you've got something glowing flying around up there. Who knows what it is? You'd have to investigate it. So, again, the TikTok case gives us a rare chance, UFO case-wise, to investigate things down to the level where we should be able to determine one way or another what has been going on. And let me tell you what the bottom line is going to be on this TikTok case going forward. Again, you have the U.S. government, people who worked with it, officials, pilots, telling us about this incident. One has to ask the question, why are they talking about it? What suddenly happened that allowed them to talk about it? If the issue was declassified, and they have cited the issue of declassification as the justification that now I can talk about this, why was it declassified? Why would the U.S. government declassify a video that supposedly shows an extraterrestrial spacecraft doing things in our atmosphere that supposedly we can't do, Russia can't do, China can't do? Why would they declassify that? Why wouldn't this be one of the ultimate secrets the U.S. government keeps under its own wing? Well, if you believe disclosure types, they keep talking about, oh, the government's going to slowly disclose things, prepare you for contact. That's just not, that's a stretch, okay? The reason it's a stretch is because they've been saying this for decades and it hasn't happened. If anything, what has helped prepare the human race, especially the West, for the idea that aliens might exist elsewhere, maybe they've even visited us or whatever, that UFOs might be real, that the government has known it, that has covered it up for years. The thing that has probably prepared us for that the most hasn't been the U.S. government. It hasn't been these UFO disclosure types running around. What has happened instead is Hollywood has largely prepared us for it. If you go back decades ago to the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, that was a huge movie at that time because it was a mind changer. It was a game changer. The success of Star Wars, rebirth of Star Trek. Look at Hollywood today. Their most recent quarter at the box office broke all records. They've never had it better. But what is causing Hollywood to make all that money? Movies, okay, fine. But what kind of movies? Science fiction and fantasy. Take out Avengers from Marvel. Take out Deadpool 2 from Marvel. Take out Solo from Disney, Star Wars. You take out The Incredibles by Pixar, again owned by Disney. Marvel and Disney again, you take out these sci-fi fantasy movies, hero movies, and all of a sudden the box office of Hollywood is a joke. There's not these movies making billions of dollars like the superhero sci-fi fantasy movies are. So because people grow up to these, to the point where in the superhero movies now for kids, they're even swearing and using the F word. They could never do that when I was a kid. The Spider-Man of today is very different than the Spider-Man I grew up with as a cartoon character as a kid. Those have prepared our culture today for the idea of aliens and UFOs. In fact, most Americans now don't even blink over the subject anymore, whereas near the end of the millennium in the late 1990s, people were practically freaking out over this subject. It was ridiculous. Remember the so-called Phoenix Lights, which was nothing but military flares, despite the lies of people who claimed to the contrary? So this disclosure thing is a can of worms that's pretty ugly because you have UFO researchers exploiting it. You have the government using UFO researchers as useful idiots to further their agenda, whatever it is. You have the government using UFOs as a cover story to further whatever they're doing. And then maybe in the middle of this, you might have real aliens coming and going. Who knows, whether it's through portals or whatever. But the point is, all this can be investigated, should be investigated, must be investigated. And I predict going forward, I'm cautiously optimistic, that sometime within the next year or so, I hope, that's just a guesstimate on my part, that maybe thanks to the work of Dr. Bruce Maccabee and others, that this case will be solved. And to be honest, I really don't care which way it comes up. If it comes up as aliens, fantastic. If it comes up as another government hypersonic vehicle test project or whatever, since they were launching 8 VTs in the area years ago, I reported on it from India, then that's fine too. What matters to me, folks, is that we find out. What the verdict is, we can take it from there. But the important thing is that we have found out what the final verdict is. Because without final verdicts, without not disclosure, but closure, that's the key, then this thing just never gets resolved and we never move things forward. And that is unacceptable. So thanks for joining me for another episode of Kal's Corner. We'll be back next week. And thanks for joining me.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com. Are you or is someone you know struggling with addictions, depression, anxiety, relationships, low self-esteem, lack of confidence, grief, success, and prosperity? Do you know that your subconscious belief plays a big role in the outcome of your hard work? We can help you permanently change the beliefs that may be the reason for your struggles and failures. We care about getting you the return on your investment and the results you are looking for. We can help you be free of the limitations of your past and in realizing your highest potential. We work with people by phone and Skype. For more information, visit us at www.ritasoman.com. That's www.ritasoman.com. Do you think you have energy problems in your home? Do you feel better when you're away than when you're home? Joey Korn is a global leader in the world of dowsing who specializes in personal energy clearing and space clearing. He can help you create an ideal energy environment in your home no matter where you live in the world. Learn about his remote spiritual house cleaning services and much more at www.dowsers.com. You can get Joey's book, Dowsing, A Path to Enlightenment, as well as other dowsing books and tools, Kabbalah books, and Walter Russell books. Joey's work is really amazing. Go to dowsers.com right now. That's DOWSERS.com or call 1-877-DOWSING. That's 1-877-369-7464.